Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Another Dolphins Podcast. For the first time of the 2024 soon-to-be NFL season, we are going to go through and project the 53-man roster. I got Houtz, I got Kat with me, and before we get into all the action, I'm getting a little preachy, I know, but I just want to remind you guys one more time, we are giving away a copy of College Football 25. I don't know if you've seen the trailers. I don't know if you're hearing about this wear and tear function they got going on. This game is looking awesome. If you would like a free copy, or at least a shot to win a free copy, all you have to do is send a question, Dolphins-related, football-related, to AnotherDolphinsPodcast@gmail.com. You will get 2 additional entries by including a screenshot of you rating our show on your app of choice. We'll announce our winner on July 7th. You'll have more than enough time to go pre-order, get all your pre-order excuses. So please, 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 if you're interested in College Football 25, send us a question. But boys, to get into the meat of today's show, Kat, I want to put you on the spot right away. Without giving me specifics of players, what was your hardest position to try to kind of shake the tree and figure out what's falling out?
Just about all of them. This was one of the hardest seasons to do, but one position specifically, I'd have to go with wide receiver.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think Jake and I were talking about. I think wide receiver, offensive line was another one that really gave me a little bit of a hiccup. So I don't like doing these predictions because I'm never right, and there's so many things that can change. So I'm kind of just strapped in here for the ride, and kind of you guys are bringing me along to do one of my first, I think, 53-man roster projections that I might have ever done.
So if we can get 4 different mock drafts from about everybody and their brother, I thought this would be a fun project, not to kind of think about like what we get wrong, but just how much is going to change over the next 4 months, how much we're going to learn about this Miami Dolphins roster, because I do think there's a few months where everybody gets really jazzed up about everything. I think this is a nice way to kind of gauge the excitement and gauge how things are going. One of my favorite things I like to hear this time of year is how the NFL draft, it doesn't change the odds for Vegas. Like, we get so jazzed up about Chop Robinson in the first round, Patrick Paul in the second. It does nothing to the odds. So I just kind of like to gauge how we feel about things and how that's going to change a couple months down the road. So, guys, starting at quarterback, each of the last 2 years, the Mike McDaniel era, Tua, Skylar Thompson, 2022 it was Teddy Bridgewater, 2023 Mike White's on board. Guys, I don't know if there's much debate here. Obviously, the Dolphins are going to keep 2 quarterbacks and cut Tua since he won't sign a cheaper contract extension.
Well, I have Skylar Thompson being cut.
Oh, you do?
I do. And look, I think that he's a player that, rightfully was kept the last 2 years, but there are so few. To me, this is a roster that could easily hold 60 to 65 players, but we got to nail it down to 53. And has Skylar Thompson done enough? In my opinion, no, to preserve that spot. But the other side of that, too, is do you consider cutting Mike White? Because Mike White, if you were to cut him, you would save $3.5 million. Mm-hmm. So if they feel like Skylar has come far enough, then maybe that's considered. A lot of people have the Dolphins keeping 3 quarterbacks. I've got them keeping 2.
Yeah, and we were talking about a little bit. I still don't know that I fully understand the rule, but I thought it was in their best interest to kind of have that break in case of emergency. So, I have them keeping 3, but you're right, man. Mike White's making a pretty significant amount of money, and they've had Skylar Thompson now for, a few seasons to see what he's all about. So, and you got to mention Gavin Hardson, right? I think he's, that kind of, okay, he's nothing. He's just an acorn that could, potentially be something there. So, I'm fine with that. Jake, how many did you have? You kept all 3 too, right?
I kept 3, and Kat, I think my biggest reason why you want to keep 3 is you put into the idea of the emergency quarterback, and it's the idea that every Sunday about 11 o'clock, the Dolphins will tweet out 6 players who are not dressing. Cam Smith was a very active name on that, it seemed like, for a little bit last year. For me, when I'm trying to think about how many players you can have impacting the team on a given Sunday, that's the only reason I think the Dolphins would be wise to keep 3, because there's always going to be those 6 guys who aren't even playing on Sundays. The fact that you can use the emergency 3rd quarterback rule as that technical 49th player on the field, even though you can't have that in other scenarios, I think that could be enough to keep Skylar Thompson on the active roster. And then you can maybe get into a debate, maybe practice squad, something like that. But as you're going to see throughout this entire podcast, I get real queasy about these guys getting snatched up on the practice squad.
Right. I can certainly understand that. And most teams are going to keep 3 quarterbacks, and the Dolphins might be one of them too. And this rule last year was made with the quarterbacks and, the emergency third quarterback to encourage teams to have 3 quarterbacks. Because if every team has 3 quarterbacks, more than likely you're going to have a star develop somewhere in the league because of that. So I completely understand that. And there's also too a scenario where, if you get Skylar Thompson back on the practice squad, then you're able to promote him several times as well. Yep. So that I think the Dolphins would absolutely try to get him back. But that's going to be the question. Do you want a third quarterback, or are you going to want to keep somebody on the bottom end of the roster? Maybe it's Eric Ezukama or a Keon Smith or somebody who is also a developmental guy that you don't want to quite let go yet.
Part of the numbers game too, where the Dolphins might have to maybe think a little differently is, they have one of the highest paid fullbacks in the league in Alec Ingold, who you have in the mix. I think we all have him making the 53. No surprise there.
No surprise. I've got 3 running backs making it. And now, now I know in previous years that the Dolphins have kept 4 or 5, but again, Jalen Wright, look, you gave up a 3rd round pick next year to be your 3rd running back. Is there really a need to stockpile players behind him? I know, look, Jeff Wilson, I think other teams around the league would be crazy not to call and offer a 7th round pick for Jeff Wilson. To offer a 7th round pick and pay him $2.5 million, I think that's well worth it for somebody who's averaging 4.5 yards a carry throughout his career. So he would be a tough cut. Dolphins could save $1.2 million by cutting him. They'd have to pay him $1.2 million as well. Chris Brooks is guaranteed $666 here, even if he's cut. I don't know how they arrange that, but I have him being cut. And of course, if Savon Ahmed makes the roster again, you're talking about, that's like playing a video game and making it to the final boss while blindfolded. He's not
pass catcher. Somehow he just gets it done.
He's not guaranteed any money, but Dolphins would save over $1 million by cutting him too. And Ahmed, even if he's cut, I think he's a sure bet to land on the Dolphins practice squad too.
I want Cryer spill milk with any of those guys if we got rid of them. I can see, the reason to get rid of a Wilson and things like that. But I think I'm kind of in the same boat as Jake. Maybe I have Mostert, Devon Achane, Jalen Wright. And then I don't know if it's a relationship between Jeff Wilson or, just the fact that they love to utilize these different running backs that I think maybe Mike McDaniel keeps him around. The Chris Brooks thing scares me. You said 666. I like him for his Derrick Henry, that thumperness, but that's the devil's number, right? Get him out. Yeah, I'm sorry, man. You got to buy a coin.
Pay him more. Maybe just decided to throw my
just $1. Like who did that? Like why? Why would you?
There has been about a year where I've been a little nervous, like what's happening with Jeff Wilson? Is there going to be an uprising in the locker room? Because if you don't remember, he was traded to the Miami Dolphins in the middle of the 2022 season because he wasn't getting any playing time with the San Francisco 49ers. And, through most of last season, I think early in the year, they even put him on injured reserve to begin the year. And there was a little debate on if that was actually necessary. I think agents were saying he'll be definitely ready by the time he's done on IR. It seems like listening to Jeff Wilson talk, he's really, and famous last words, I could be super wrong here. It seems like he's done a great job just learning to beat that aqua and orange drum a little bit and be just, the leader in the locker room, that type of guy. He's had some strong quotes about how he understands the flows of being a running back and how he still, has that fire to prove people wrong. So that'll be a very interesting one to follow. Josh, I'm with you at 4, but again, it's going to be a numbers game and it starts with some of these other positions here. Tight ends, Kat, starting with you. And I want to ask, did you remember that the Dolphins had 5 tight ends in Mike McDaniel's first year in an offense that targeted it like 5% of the time? Insane.
Yeah, I do remember that. And it's odd because now I've got, really, I consider Alec Ingold, who I also have making the team too, like we talked about, really as a tight end. He lines up as a tight end a lot of the time. He readjusts into the backfield a lot, but to me, he's got to be factored into. And with that, I've only got the Dolphins keeping 2 players, Jonnu Smith and Durham Smythe. So going really light at quarterback, running back, and tight end to start it out so that I can add on a little bit more later. But I'll tell you what, is it impossible Durham Smythe gets cut? I mean, I look at it and they could save almost $2 million by cutting him. And you got to look at, Janu Smith is a lock to make the team. But they spent a lot of time on Julian Hill last year and they put up with a lot with him, and he's 5 years younger. And you've also signed Jody Fortson from the Chiefs, who does have some experience and some physical traits that are attractive to the tight end position too. So I don't know if I'd call Durham Smythe a lock, but I do have him as one of the two tight ends here with Janu Smith.
Jake, why don't you tell us what you have? Let's switch it up a little bit, because I'm sitting here looking at it and I kind of think I left Julian Hill out of this equation. So now I'm like sitting here trying to crunch the numbers and see what I'm doing here, because this isn't necessarily what I would do. It's kind of what the Dolphins would, right? I mean, we're kind of trying to project who we're going to see out there. So what do you think about that tight end room, Jake?
I think that if we were in the locker room every day, we'd see a lot more than Durham Smythe's stats, because when you look at his stats, when you look at his blocking numbers, like it's sure, like it works, but I think there's maybe like kind of like I'm seeing with Jeff Wilson, I'm seeing a little bit more of a vibe, that culture in the locker room type of guy that Durham Smythe has been for the Dolphins. I have them keeping 3. I don't know if I'm catching the OTA vibe that Jody Fortson. I think he had one clip they put on Twitter. That was enough for me. He high pointed a ball, walked into the end zone. That's kind of the body type that the Dolphins have really been searching for. And I won't get too deep into this, but guys like Jody Fortson and Eric Ezukama, it just seems like they just stick out in terms of the traits on this Dolphins roster in such a unique way where I wouldn't say it's an easier path to make the roster, but I'd be willing to hang up and listen if Jody Fortson makes it. And even though if he's not really a part of things early on, he can eventually form into being that, red zone target.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what's hard right now. We're just kind of going based off of, what we're seeing. In a lot of the clips, you do see him out there making plays. So, I originally had him on the list, but I'm talking myself into, I still have the 3 tight ends, but I think I'm going to go with Durham Smythe, Janu Smith, and we'll go with Julian Hill. I don't know. I guess I just need to see more out of the Jody Fortson, but dude, I do think that he can bring that dynamic that the Dolphins have desperately needed, that big body and be that playmaker. I think he did make some plays before he messed up that shoulder there with Kansas City.
And Kat, you nailed it there. Julian Hill spent a lot of time with this team. The Dolphins seem like they're really committed to developing these players. They don't keep them around for nothing, so that'll be interesting to see. 6 wide receivers for me for the Miami Dolphins. 3 were very easy. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Odell Beckham Jr. My other 3, I went Braxton Berrios, Malik Washington, Eric Ezukama. What say you, Kat?
I'm right there with you on all 6 of them. The 2 left out, River Craycraft, the Dolphins re-signed him, but no guaranteed money. They save $1.1 million if they cut him. And then Taj Washington, everyone's seen the long catch and OTAs from him on Twitter. Has some talent. I would love to get him back on the practice squad, but I match you on that. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Odell Beckham, Braxton Berrios, Eric Ezukama, and Malik Washington are my 6 wide receivers.
Okay, I'm still going through and I'm still trying to make sure I have my numbers crunched, but I believe I'm keeping Taj Washington as well. So I think I'm keeping 7. I think I have all the guys you have, and then again, I've been trying to get a little bit overly hyped about him, whether it's the aesthetic, the way he doesn't finish, he continues after the play, making those blocks. I think Taj Washington has a role, and we did, we're talking about hype videos with Jody Fortson. I mean, we did see Taj Washington catch that nice ball too. So I'm buying the hype. So I'll keep 7 receivers.
Kat, who's your first one out of that 6?
Washington, because he's the Dolphins thought enough of him to draft him in the 7th round. And, he's a player that I thought was going to be more of a 4th or a 5th round guy. And you're somebody who had almost 1,100 yards last year at a major college, so I think he's somebody that has a good chance. And maybe the Dolphins don't let him go because they would have a fear that he would not get back on the practice squad.
Who would be the receiver you knocked off? Who do you think's at the bottom of that 6 you're keeping? If you had to keep 6.
So of those 6, if I had to go down to 5?
If you had the 6 and you wanted to bring up Taj Washington into that 6, who would you want to cut? If you had to, if things were to shake out.
Probably Malik Washington. I really think that, I love these head-to-head battles 1-versus-1 in training camp and preseason. I think Jody Fortson versus Julian Hill is a great one. And if you're keeping 4 running backs, Jeff Wilson against Savon Ahmed and against Chris Brooks in a triple threat match. I like that too. At wide receiver, both rookies, 6th and 7th rounders, Malik Washington and Taj Washington, to me are going to be battling for that final wide receiver spot. Craycraft may stick around long enough to compete in there as well, but it'd be pretty rare for a team to draft receivers in the 6th and 7th round and cut both of them.
Keep that. Somebody write that down. That's a great idea going into training camp. Our favorite one-on-one battles for those roster spots. That's an excellent idea. I wonder, Andy Reid had a great quote. He was talking about the new kickoff rule recently and how they might be using a position player to do the kicks instead of their actual kicker. And that got me thinking, if we really fully understand the concept that this new kickoff rule is going to be, and when we think that Braxton Berrios locks on a spot on this roster because of his abilities as a kick returner, are we sure we're not going to see Devon Achane and maybe Tyreek Hill back there? Just the Dolphins doing different things to take advantage of those plays. So I wonder if that the stability he provided at kick returner is actually going to still be there with the new kick returner. That might sound a little crazy, but that's kind of where I'm leaning with Berrios if he's not that consistent receiver you want on third down.
Yeah, and punt return too. I mean, if you take a look at the other Dolphins receivers, yes, Tyreek Hill can obviously return punts. Javon Holland can return punts, but do you really want them in that role? And if you look past Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, Odell Beckham's never returned punts. Malik Washington in college never returned punts. Taj Washington never returned punts. Ezukama never returned punts. So that kind of makes Braxton Berrios, to me, almost a lock to make the team for no other reason other than to be a sure-handed punt returner as well as a depth receiver.
Offensive linemen, I kept 10 of them. Kat, let's start with you. How many you got?
10. We're going right down the list here. I have a feeling we might disagree on one of them, but I've got at offensive. Let's see how I want to do this here. The starting offensive line: Teron Armstead at left tackle, Isaiah Wynn at left guard, Brewer at center, Robert Jones at right guard, Austin Jackson at right tackle. And then the backups, I think Patrick Paul, 2nd-round pick, is a lock, obviously. Liam Eichenberg has got to be a lock because of his versatility. Kendall Lamb, to me, is also a lock as the 8th guy because, normally it might be up for debate, but you're guaranteeing this guy $1.6 million this year. It's very rare you cut somebody who's making that much guaranteed money. So he's number 8. Jack Driscoll, because of his positional versatility, also keep him. He's guaranteed almost $1 million as well. And then I can't let go of Keon Smith after what I saw from him last year. So he would probably be the 52nd or 53rd player on the roster overall. But he's a player that if the Dolphins let go, I think that he'd get swooped up pretty quickly just because of his athleticism and what he did show in his limited snaps last year. So those are my 10.
Yeah, I think I have the exact same as Jake, so I don't know if Jake wants to list off his, but I'm okay with any of them, right? It's sitting here and it's a battle, and those spots towards the end, it comes down to who's more versatile and who has that experience that could just kind of be plug and play as we've seen in years past.
So last year, Keon Smith did land a spot on the 53-man roster to begin the season. My only difference, and I think Josh is the same, is we have Lester Cotton over Smith. I kind of saw like a logjam forming when you have Teron Armstead, Kendall Lamb, and Patrick Paul. That's kind of awkward, but then I, got to thinking that they did use Lamb as a backup right tackle as well last season. And God, this is awful. I already forgot his name. Who was the guy 2 years ago who came in and he was awesome at left tackle, but wasn't the same at right tackle?
Oh, Brandon Shell.
Brandon Shell, exactly. And I don't know if I was mixing that up, but that was probably the biggest reason why I went Lester Cotton. But thinking about that, yeah, I would be kind of cool with those two. Keon Smith versus Lester Cotton, despite being a little different positions, that might be one of those battles to watch as well.
Yeah, and Driscoll too. It might be Driscoll against Lester Cotton for that backup guard spot. Because you got to think, Patrick Paul is a lock, 2nd-round pick. It doesn't matter what he does in camp. Liam Eichenberg plays too many positions, regardless of how you feel about him as a starter. covers too many positions and is still on a rookie contract here. So, and I also believe because of, the 1.6 million guaranteed, Lamb is also a lock to make it. So Driscoll, Keon Smith, Lester Cotton, and it'd be interesting to see if anybody pokes their head into the race too, like a Chase and Hines.
Mm-hmm. And then Ryan Hayes, he's still in the mix as well.
Ryan Hayes, yeah.
So there's a little versatility there. Josh, you want to kick us off with defensive linemen? Because, the Dolphins signed about 50 of them, so just start shooting your darts, my friend.
Yeah, so, I guess we'll start at defensive tackle. I have, 4, and then edge, I got 5. So, 9 players? I got Tier Tart, Zach Steeler, Benito Jones, Deshaun Hand at defensive tackle, and then, edge, defensive end, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Shaq Barrett, Mo Camaro, Chop Robinson. So, I don't know if I missed anyone there. Again, I'm sitting here trying to add up and make sure I'm not one player over, but I think, they're just going to battle and kind of let those 2 guys next to Zach Steeler fight it out. What is your guys' list? What's your number? How many guys you kept?
Josh, can you just repeat let's just do the defensive line at first, the interior guys. My bad about that. So you had 4 of them?
No, that's fine. Yeah, Tier Tart, Zach Steeler, Benito Jones, and Deshaun Ham. But, some of those guys, it's going to be a battle. So I'm not, saying these guys are the definitive here. I'm just thinking that's about the number they keep. 4 defensive tackles?
Yeah, and it's and this is with the front 7 because is, for example, Neville Gallimore, a defensive tackle or a defensive end, is Phillips a defensive end or an outside linebacker? That's where it gets a little convoluted. So defensive line. So I'm counting Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Cameron Good, Chop Robinson, Mo Kamara as linebackers, outside linebackers. So we'll get that out of the way. So sticking strictly with defensive line, and if this is an overall prediction show, I'm going to cheat a little bit on this, and I'm putting Calais Campbell on the team
because I love it.
I don't, and it's not, I typically don't like to predict that, but I look at it just the massive need at 3-4 defensive end, and Calais Campbell isn't going to retire. He wants to play for a team that can win, and he went to college, went to high school in Miami, and has played in 2 Super Bowls and hasn't won one. So he's going to want to play for a good team, and he's not going to be overly expensive. So with that, I've got Calais Campbell, Tier Tart, and Zach Sealer as the starting 3. And then behind him, Benito Jones and Neville Gallimore I've got on the team. And an important note on them is their contracts are fully guaranteed, $1.8 million, fully guaranteed. So if you keep them or you cut them, you're paying them the same amount of money. So those are my 4 and my 5, and then Deshaun Hand as my 6th.
I only have 5 right now because I don't have Calais Campbell. I didn't unlock that part of the battle pass yet. But I don't know if you mentioned he has 2 years of experience with Anthony Weaver playing in Baltimore as well. It just is such a home run pick. And Jordan Poyer, Odell Beckham, we already are hearing that players are coming to Miami to play and compete and hopefully win playoff games. So that would make a lot of sense there. Moving on, one final note here. The Dolphins had 6 defensive linemen to begin 2022. That dropped to 5 last season. And here we are probably going to be sticking around that 5 spot. Linebackers, edge guys, linebackers. I threw the edge and linebackers together into one, and I had 9 of them. But Josh, let's start with your, if you can mush them together, your edges and linebackers.
Together. All right, where the hell did I write my linebackers at? I'm all over the place here. Oh, here we go. Okay. So I got, in linebacker, I got David Long, Anthony Walker, Jordan Brooks, and then I was going to keep Duke Riley or another guy, but I put Channing Tindall down. I'm hyped up for what Travis Wingfield says. And I do want to go back. Neville Gallimore I did have, but I had to cross him out because I kept Taj Washington. So I'm starting to run into problems there. And then at edge, I got Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Shaq Barrett, Mo Kamara, and Chop Robinson. So total, I got 9 there. So again, I'm starting to feel like Taj Washington.
Yeah, a linebacker. So I've got Bradley Chubb and Cameron Good on PUP to start the year. And I've got Jalen Phillips might be there as well, but I'm holding out hope that he can be back for week 1. If not, maybe you don't put him on PUP and keep him out for the first 6 weeks of the season. So this is by far the most complicated one to explain. But so overall, outside linebackers and inside linebackers. On the outside, I've got Jalen Phillips, Shaq Barrett, and then the rookies Chop Robinson and Mo Kamara. as my 4. On the inside, I thought I would have to put up a really strong argument for this, but I also have Duke Riley being cut, along with Houtz. So I've got Jordan Brooks, David Long, Anthony Walker, and Channing Tindall. The reason for cutting Duke Riley, you save $2.5 million if you cut Duke Riley. You still have to pay him $600,000, but it's time for Channing Tindall, if for nothing else, to take over as the special teams demon and hopefully also get on the field in blitz packages. So those are my 8 guys, with Duke Riley being the kind of the surprise one cut.
Interesting. I'm at 9. I have Duke Riley over Channing Tindall, but now that we're talking out, you have Bradley Chubb going to PUP. That'd bring me down to 8. Have Channing Tindall throwing at that spot, having someone that can blitz there from the inside linebacker position. That makes a lot of sense. I'm just going to say this again as a PCA. Don't sleep on Anthony Walker. This guy's going to be absolutely awesome, I think, for the Dolphins. A lot of highlight reel type plays. For years, we had Xavier Howard anchoring the defense at cornerback. That's no longer the case. I had 5 cornerbacks to kick things off, Jalen Ramsey, Kendall Fuller, Kader Kohu, Cam Smith, and Storm Duck. I did it.
Let's see. Overall, I've got, this kind of gets convoluted too with cornerbacks and safeties. Overall, I have 12 defensive backs. Mm-hmm. And I think the Dolphins kept 11 last year. And so of my 12, at cornerback, I've got Jalen Ramsey, Kendall Fuller, Kader Kohu, Cam Smith, Saran Neal, and yes, I put Storm Duck on there too. You've got to have some undrafted free agents, I think, on this list here, because 2 or 3 are going to make it every year. And then at safety, I've got Javon Holland, Jordan Poyer, Nick Needham, Elijah Campbell, McMorris, and Mark Perry making it as the 6th safety. It was Mark Perry, a player that I think would have been a mid-round pick if he had a few more interceptions at TCU. He had none in his entire career, but this is somebody who's 6 foot tall, 210 pounds, and runs a 4.4 flat. I think this is exactly the type of guy that can come in as an undrafted free agent and challenge for a roster spot. So I went really heavy at defensive back and offensive line and a little bit lighter at the other positions.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching a little bit of Mark Perry, and that was kind of that name that I've seen. I don't know if it was a lot of mock drafts posts or what, but it was that player that I knew stood out, and I know we've heard some things about him. So when I watched the tape, I actually did have him down as one of my 4 safeties, but I'm starting to realize, you mentioned Saran Neal. I mean, he's definitely going to make the roster, and I don't even know. So, yeah, Houtz is fired. I'm out of here. I'm out. Not ninth GM of the year this year. That's for sure. I had the same corners as Jake did, though, for what it's worth, although I wrote down Duck Storm, so fail. Big fail.
I beefed it by not having Neal, but just looking at the dynamic of this roster, Jalen Ramsey is going to play all over the place. Kader Kohu, he's best inside. I have Nick Needham at safety, who's going to be doing a little bit of both, slot corner, safety as well. You don't have a lot of boundary guys. Kendall Fuller, he's actually transitioned well the last few years to being a boundary guy, and that's why I have Storm Duck making it, just for the specific trait that he is one of those boundary cornerbacks. You can have him play zone. He's not going to get beat deep, and maybe that's all you're going to be asking from those guys. Just to be different, I went Jordan Colbert as my 4th safety, just because that 6'3" frame. Give me Cam Chancellor on the Miami Dolphins. That's all I want, especially when you consider Jordan Poyer, somebody who can really play in the box, be that tackler over the middle. Javon Holland can line up all over the field, free safety, slot cornerback. Give me that hard-hitting smasher like Colbert. Why not? Mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to go heavy at defensive back. I mean, I think the days of keeping just 8 or 9 guys are over. I mean, we have gotten late in the season so many times, and we've we're without our starting cornerbacks and a safety hobbling, and we're playing RJ Stanford and Bakari Rambo and these types of players. It seems to be that case every year. So I like, with this Dolphins defensive back spot, I like the starters. I like the depth, and I think you got to keep a few younger players on the back end too for development.
Josh, I want to ask you. So Josh Boyer defense 2022, they kept 10 defensive backs. Vic Fangio, a lot more zone defense, a little more conservative, 11 defensive backs. Now we hear Anthony Weaver, the defense loves to have 3 safeties. I really wanted to use the nerd voice there. How many defensive backs would you kind of consider, just knowing that Josh Boyer, that blitz-happy defense, was 10, Vic Fangio was 11?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have 9 here, and I felt like that was kind of stretching a little bit thin, and that doesn't even account for what Ciaran Neal could have done. So, yeah, I think they need to have more of up there, 10 to 11, but I really can't say if Anthony Weaver's defense is going to, need those extra pieces on the back end, because when you look at that defensive line, I mean, unless you bring in a Calais Campbell or, make that move and bring in someone that can impact up there, I mean, you might be just keep throwing bodies next to Zach Sealer. So, good question, Jake. I don't really know the answer, but the good thing about this is we're sitting here making a lot of tough decisions, and the Dolphins are not going to leave any stone unturned in bringing in guys. But a lot of these guys, they hopefully can stash on the practice squad. Some of these guys that we're nitpicking about. So definitely going through this, you can see where not keeping a third quarterback definitely came in handy, as well as some of those other things that kept on.
Jake Bailey, Jason Sanders, Blake Ferguson. Is there any shocker surprises there?
No, Jake Bailey's contract is guaranteed, so unfortunately, I can't even predict him to be off the roster. So no,
that surprises me so much that they instantly didn't they didn't leave any doubt that it wasn't going to be Jake Bailey. That was a little bit of a shocker.
Well, so much of it was made of that Jake Bailey is the holder for Jason Sanders. I'm like, dude, I never imply I can play professional football, but give me a week and I think I could manage that. I mean, I think it's really odd. I think it was odd that they didn't bring back Thomas Morstead to begin with. And I think it was even more odd they signed Jake Bailey, and then even more odd that they brought him back and re-signed him for almost $2 million a year. The whole situation was just weird to me.
This is a huge offseason or season for Danny Crossman. I don't want to go too deep down the special teams rabbit hole, but I mean, if this special teams unit again just continues to be one of the worst units in the league, gonna have to start flipping some tables or something. It's a little ridiculous. Guys, before we wrap up here, I do want to talk a little bit about the OTAs the Miami Dolphins have been doing, because we're starting to get some interesting notes about what the coaching staff is thinking. And Kat, I want to start with you. While Aaron Brewer is still getting accustomed to things, I don't think he was at all the OTAs. They are optional. What are your thoughts when you hear that Liam Eichenberg is still going to be that that backup center? But he also said when Brewer comes back, he's going to be practicing at guard most of the time as well.
Yeah, I'm not too surprised about that. I mean, Eichenberg, you take a look at him being the backup center last year, and then Connor Williams goes down. The year before that, the Dolphins really kept Michael Dieter as the backup center and didn't have him compete at the guard spot. Making sure that Eichenberg's head's in the game as the backup center is really important. And when you look at the guards right now, I mean, Isaiah Wynn, Robert Jones, Liam Eichenberg, Jack Driscoll, Lester Cotton. I mean, I guess you can make a case with the Dolphins going light at the guard spot that Eichenberg is one of the 2 best guards on the roster right now. So it's not a huge surprise. He's a valuable swing piece. Was he worth a second round pick a few years ago, and a trade up for a future third rounder? Probably not. But I think he's going to be an important piece here somewhere throughout the season.
Queasy, Jake. We always use that word. I mean, that's the first thing I think is, oh man, we're Anthony Brewer injury away from, or an Aaron Brewer injury away from seeing Liam Eichenberg at center. So like you said, he is one of the better guards. He's pretty much got a starting spot there, and he can go out there and prove he's worth, but I do not want to see him taking snaps at center at any point. So let's just hope this stays an OTA thing.
It's a contract year for Mr. Fantastic, as Jalen Waddle called him. I just go back, why are we... If he's going to lock in and be your backup center in case anything happens, let him just play center. I just cannot get over the fact we still do this flip-flopping back and forth with these players just in OTAs, let alone mid-season. I thought Eichenberg played pretty well when he was a right guard last year, and if you think he can develop into being a starting right guard, go send a 6th-round pick to Cat. Who'd they trade last year? The backup center? Dan Feeney?
Dan Feeney, yeah.
Get Dan Feeney if you want Liam Eichenberg to be a guard. I just would like them to make a decision instead of just, playing pong back and forth with someone like that.
Yeah, and, I mean, Isaiah Wynn and Robert Jones, I don't love them as the starting guards, but I thought Wynn played – I thought both of them did a serviceable job last year. So – the question has to be asked, is Eichenberg so much more significantly better than either of those players where you're going to have him compete at guard instead of just keeping his head at center? But, Eichenberg seems to be a very versatile, intelligent player, so it seems like he might be up to handling both tasks.
I think Driscoll could also, get a little momentum here as a starter.
Good. He hasn't been as good as I thought he would be when the Eagles drafted. I thought he was going to be like a second rounder the year he was drafted. Went in the 4th round, and he was okay. He got into the game at right tackle when Lane Johnson went down for the Eagles. And he did I'd say a below average job for starting right tackle, and he also has guard versatility. So he'll be competing for a roster spot, but considering he's guaranteed almost $1 million, he's probably on the inside looking out right now.
It's a Butch Berry rebuild right there. Let's get him to fine tune some of those pieces in that old workhorse, little car.
Kat, we weren't able to get your reaction to this, but Jalen Waddle signed a 3-year extension. He'll be in Miami through 2028. I said this when we recorded the pod. It's not often, we haven't won a playoff game in 20 years, but this is just one of those things you can kind of just feel good about and celebrate. Do you agree, disagree?
I 100% agree. And was it more than what I thought it would be? Maybe by a few million, but nothing for me to complain about. I mean, when you look at it, I expected him to get pretty much the same contract as Devontae Smith got. 3 years, $75 million, around there. He got 3 years, $84 million, $76 million guaranteed. I think Waddle is a more valuable piece moving forward than Smith is, and just because of his skill set. But they're not too far off from each other. So, but what I like the most about it is 75% of the reason that I didn't like the Dolphins signing Odell Beckham was Jalen Waddle, because I thought if you bring in Beckham, you bring in Genu Smith, you bring in Jalen Wright, are you going to run into a problem with Jalen Waddle where he's like, no, I'm in a contract year. Like, this is my year to make money. I'm not okay catching 70 passes for 1,000 yards. I feel like I'm a $30-35 million receiver, but I'm second fiddle on my own team. And now you've got all these other dudes coming in on top of it. So that's the main reason I'm glad Waddle is taken care of. He's 25 years old. He's the future number 1 receiver when Tyreek Hill leaves, whenever he does, whether it's next year or the year after, because Hill's 30 years old, Waddle's 25. I mean, so I'm overall, yes, very happy that the Dolphins were able to get this done with Waddle.
Josh, we spoke a little bit on the last podcast about how the same day the Jalen Waddle contract was announced, there was rumblings about Tyreek Hill and another contract and things like that. Mike McDaniel had an interesting quote during OTAs. He was talking about the dynamic of Hill, Waddle, and OBJ on the field together. He said that we haven't seen them on the field together yet, but they're going to need to fight and claw for each and every target. How do you see that dynamic kind of shaking out now that, especially that Waddle side, now Tyreek might maybe not be upset, but knocking on the door?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting for sure. I mean, I thought at first it was just coach speak, right? Let those guys go out there and give it their all every day in battle and think they're fighting for these targets. But let's be honest, that's what they're doing, right? I mean, they need basically what I got out of that was Odell Beckham needs to learn the playbook and learn some of the nuances before he can even, maybe even start to even think about taking on a bigger role in this offense. But it's a great problem to have, and I'm intrigued to see what that third element to this offense can do. And like Kat said, Jalen Waddle's happy now. He's our future. This offense should be a psycho killer this year.
Kat, Tyreek Hill was on a podcast recently, and he said how after the game in Kansas City, Mike McDaniel even came up to him, and he's like, "What the hell is that? What are we paying for?" What would the scenario look like where if Odell Beckham has a couple strong games, Jalen Waddle is playing well? Obviously, the Dolphins have more strong targets this year, so I think the target share per player is going to go down slightly. But what would this offense look like if, you slowly start to see maybe them slightly pumping the brakes on someone like Tyreek Hill?
That's really should be the expectation this year. I mean, look, and that's what helps with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, getting paid already. That they've got their money, and they have to see themselves that they can't be this top heavy at wide receiver as they were last year, because you get late in the year, you have some bumps and bruises. Other players have to be ready and battle tested to step up. And that didn't happen last year. And after relying on them so much late in the season, it really came back to bite the Dolphins. And you watch the all 22 of those last 2 or 3 games, you're just seeing not hardly any separation out of the receivers, even though Hill and Waddle are known for that. So no, I'm looking forward to kind of diversifying a lot of these positions here in 2024.
Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for joining. Thank you all so much for listening. We will talk to you soon. And until next time, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.